What if the thing you are desperately trying to fix is not actually going wrong? What if the rejection, the delay, the ending, the uncertainty, and even the strange feeling that your old life no longer fits are not signs that you have lost your way? What if they are signs that something deeper inside you has already changed, and your outer life is only beginning to catch up? Most people interpret disruption as failure. When a relationship changes, they try to restore it. When a door closes, they immediately search for another one. When plans collapse, they assume they made a mistake. And when life stops responding the way it used to, they become afraid. But Carl Jung's psychology points toward a very different possibility. There are moments in psychological development when what feels like life falling apart may actually be the visible consequence of an invisible transformation. The person you were built a certain life, certain relationships, certain ambitions, certain habits, certain ways of seeking approval, certain ways of protecting yourself. And if that person begins to change, the life constructed around that identity cannot always remain exactly the same. This is where most people panic. They see the external disruption, but they cannot yet see the internal reorganization behind it. And so they fight desperately to restore what their own psyche may already be trying to outgrow. But what if you stopped fighting for just a moment? What if instead of immediately asking, "How do I make everything go back to normal?" you asked a much more disturbing question. What if normal is exactly what I am being asked to leave behind? Because sometimes, everything begins working in your favor long before it feels as though anything is working at all. And understanding this may completely change the way you experience the most uncertain periods of your life. If you have ever felt that your life was falling apart just as something inside you was beginning to change, stay with me. Because by the end of this video, you may see those moments very differently. And if this kind of exploration helps you understand what is happening beneath the surface of your own life, subscribe to The Kingdom Within. This is where we explore the hidden psychological forces shaping who you are becoming. There is a strange assumption most of us carry without realizing it. We assume that if we are moving in the right direction, life should become easier. The right relationship should stay. The right opportunity should appear. The right decision should produce an immediate reward. The right path should feel certain. And therefore, when something becomes difficult, we instinctively interpret difficulty as evidence that something has gone wrong. But psychological transformation does not work this way. Growth often creates disorder before it creates coherence. Think about what happens when a person begins questioning an identity they have carried for years. Perhaps they have always been the agreeable one, the person who never disappoints anyone, the one who says yes even when they want to say no, the one who keeps the peace, the one who remains quiet, the one who sacrifices themselves so that everyone else can remain comfortable. For years, this identity may appear to work. People appreciate them. Relationships remain stable. Conflict is avoided. Everything seems predictable. But underneath that stability, something is slowly being sacrificed. Their anger, their desires, their boundaries, their ambition, their creativity, their voice. Pieces of the personality that could not fit the acceptable image are pushed away. Jung called this hidden territory the shadow. The shadow is often misunderstood as something evil inside us, but it is far more complex than that. The shadow contains what consciousness refuses to identify with. Sometimes that includes aggression, envy, fear, or selfish impulses. But it can also contain courage, creativity, sexuality, leadership, spontaneity, power, the ability to say no, even the ability to pursue a life that other people may not understand. And the longer these qualities remain excluded, the more energy is required to keep them outside consciousness. You begin fighting yourself without realizing that you are fighting yourself. One part of you wants change. Another part wants safety. One part wants to speak. Another fears rejection. One part wants to walk away. Another asks what everyone will think. One part knows that something is finished. Another desperately tries to keep it alive. This inner conflict consumes enormous psychological energy. And this is where something fascinating begins to happen. At first, nothing outside you may change. You still wake up in the same house. You still have the same responsibilities. You may still have the same job. The same problems may even be waiting for you. But your relationship with them begins changing. Things that once controlled your emotions lose some of their power. Situations you once tolerated begin feeling strangely uncomfortable. Conversations you once rehearsed repeatedly in your mind become simpler. You begin saying things you previously could not say. You stop explaining yourself quite so much. You stop chasing certain forms of validation. You stop trying to convince people to understand you. And perhaps most importantly, you begin losing the desire to force everything. That does not mean becoming passive. It does not mean sitting at home believing that the universe will solve your problems. And it certainly does not mean pretending that painful events are secretly wonderful. It means something psychologically deeper. Your actions stop coming primarily from fear. Consider how much of human behavior is actually an attempt to prevent something. We work because we fear becoming worthless. We stay because we fear being alone. We impress because we fear being ignored. We accumulate because we fear not having enough. We control because we fear uncertainty. We please because we fear rejection. We rush because we fear being left behind. From the outside, these behaviors may look completely different, but underneath them can exist the same psychological command. Something bad will happen unless I control what happens next. Imagine living with that command for 20 years. Every decision becomes a negotiation with fear. Every delay feels threatening. Every rejection feels personal. Every unexpected event becomes evidence that life is against you. You do not simply experience reality. You continuously attempt to defend yourself from reality. And eventually, this defense becomes so familiar that you call it your personality. But Jung believed that much of what we call personality is actually adaptation. The persona is the face we learn to present to the world. It allows us to function socially. There is nothing inherently wrong with it. The problem begins when we forget that it is a role. When the mask becomes indistinguishable from the person wearing it, then life becomes organized around maintaining that identity. You choose what the identity would choose. You reject what threatens the identity. You remain close to people who reinforce the identity. You pursue goals that confirm the identity. And you may spend years building a life around someone you were required to become, rather than someone you consciously chose to be. Then, one day, something changes. Perhaps nothing dramatic happens. Maybe you simply become tired. Not physically tired, psychologically tired. Tired of pretending to care. Tired of explaining. Tired of performing strength. Tired of chasing the next achievement. Tired of relationships in which you disappear. Tired of repeating the same emotional pattern with different people. You cannot explain exactly what is happening. You only know that the old way has become unbearable. This is often where people believe something is wrong with them. But sometimes, this discomfort is the beginning of something Jung considered central to psychological development: individuation. Individuation is not becoming perfect. It is not becoming spiritually superior. It is not eliminating every contradiction inside yourself. It is the gradual process through which a person becomes more psychologically whole. And wholeness has a price, because becoming more fully yourself means eventually confronting everything that was built around you being someone else. This is why inner transformation can create external disruption. The moment you change the psychological structure, maintaining your life, some elements of that life may begin to move. This does not mean that some mysterious force is removing people from your life. It means that you are no longer unconsciously supplying the same conditions. Suppose you have a friendship built almost entirely around you listening while the other person speaks. For 10 years, it works. They call, you listen, they complain, you comfort. They need something, you appear, and because you have unconsciously learned that being needed makes you valuable, you rarely question the arrangement. Then you begin changing. You start noticing resentment. Previously, you would have pushed that resentment away. You would have told yourself, they need me. I shouldn't be selfish. That's just who I am. But now, you become curious about the resentment instead of ashamed of it. What is it trying to tell you? Perhaps that emotion contains a boundary. Perhaps there is a part of you that is tired of disappearing. So the next time the phone rings, something different happens. You still care about the person, but you say, I can't talk tonight. Nothing dramatic. 4 words. Yet, psychologically, an entire structure has shifted. If the friendship can adapt, it may become healthier. If it existed only because you had no boundaries, it may begin falling apart. From the outside, you might say, I started working on myself and suddenly I lost a friend. And that statement would be technically true, but psychologically incomplete, because what disappeared may not have been friendship itself. What disappeared may have been the unconscious contract upon which that friendship depended. This is why some losses arrive immediately after growth, not because growth is punishing you, but because growth reveals what required your unconsciousness in order to survive. And once you understand that, you begin looking at endings differently. Not every ending is good. Not every loss is necessary. Not every rejection carries some hidden cosmic purpose. We have to be careful here, otherwise psychology becomes superstition. Sometimes a bad event is simply a bad event. Sometimes we make poor decisions. Sometimes circumstances are unfair. Sometimes people hurt us. Sometimes things fail. Jungian psychology does not require us to deny reality. In fact, genuine psychological development demands that we become more capable of facing reality. But there is an enormous difference between saying, everything that happens is good, and saying, I do not yet know what this experience may become inside me. The first statement can be denial. The second is psychological openness. And that distinction changes everything. Because when something goes wrong, most people immediately create a second problem. First comes the event. Then comes the interpretation. The relationship ends. That is the event. I will never be loved again. That is an interpretation. The opportunity disappears. That is the event. I have ruined my future. Interpretation. Someone rejects you. Event. I am not enough. Interpretation. Your plans change. Event. I am falling behind. Interpretation. And very often, the interpretation creates more suffering than the original event. Because now, you are not only dealing with what happened, you are dealing with an entire imagined future built from what happened. This is where the phrase, act as if everything is working out, becomes psychologically interesting. Not because you should lie to yourself, not because you should pretend that disappointment does not hurt, but because your interpretation determines the psychological position from which you respond. Imagine 2 people experiencing the same rejection. The first thinks, this proves that I am not good enough. The second thinks, I don't understand this yet. Let me see what this reveals. Same event. Completely different psychological movement. The first contracts. The second remains curious. The first searches for evidence of inadequacy. The second searches for information. The first becomes identified with the wound. The second experiences the wound without turning it into an identity. And over time, those interpretations produce different decisions. This is one of the hidden ways your inner world begins shaping your outer life, not through magic, through perception, through attention, through behavior, through what you tolerate, through what you notice, through what you attempt, through what you believe is available to you, and through the meaning you give to what happens next. Once you understand this, something very strange becomes possible. You can experience uncertainty without immediately treating uncertainty as danger. And when that happens, life begins to feel different. Not because you finally control everything, but because you no longer require control in order to remain psychologically grounded. That is a very different kind of power, and it leads us toward an even deeper question. If your life is not always responding to what you consciously want, what exactly is it responding to? Because sometimes, the part of you demanding that everything remain the same is not the deepest part of you at all. Sometimes, it is simply the identity most afraid of disappearing. And when that identity begins losing control, it will interpret almost every transformation as catastrophe. That is why the moment when everything seems to be going wrong may sometimes be the precise moment when you need to look more closely. Not at what life is taking from you, but at who inside you is terrified of losing it. And this is where the real psychological struggle begins. Because the ego does not experience transformation as transformation. It experiences transformation as loss. When an identity has organized your life for years, anything that threatens that identity can feel like a threat to your existence. You may consciously say that you want change. You may say you want freedom. You may say you want a different relationship, a different career, a different way of living. But another part of you may still be deeply invested in keeping everything exactly as it is, because even an unhappy identity can feel safer than an unknown one. This explains one of the strangest contradictions in human behavior. People often remain attached to situations they consciously claim to hate. They complain about the same relationship for years. They remain inside the same destructive pattern. They repeat the same reaction. They continue living according to expectations they openly resent. And yet, when an opportunity for genuine change appears, fear suddenly becomes overwhelming. Why? Because familiarity creates psychological safety. The unconscious does not always ask, "Is this good for me?" Very often it asks, "Do I recognize this?" And those are completely different questions. You can recognize suffering. You can recognize rejection. You can recognize emotional neglect. You can recognize chaos. You can recognize being overlooked. You can recognize having to prove yourself. And because these patterns are familiar, they can begin to feel strangely like home. This is why someone can leave one relationship and unconsciously recreate the same emotional dynamic with another person. Different face, same wound. Different circumstances, same psychological script. Different year, same inner story. Jung understood that until unconscious patterns become conscious, they continue shaping our lives from beneath the surface. And when we do not recognize them, we tend to experience their consequences as though they were simply happening to us. This is why transformation requires more than positive thinking. You cannot simply repeat that everything is working out while continuing to obey the same unconscious pattern. Real change begins when you can recognize what inside you keeps recreating the same world. Imagine a woman who repeatedly becomes involved with emotionally unavailable people. Each relationship begins differently. One person is charming, another is quiet, another seems extremely independent, another appears deeply ambitious. But eventually, the same emotional structure emerges. She reaches, they withdraw. She becomes anxious, they become distant. She tries harder, they retreat further. Eventually, the relationship collapses, and every time, she tells herself, "I keep meeting the wrong people." Perhaps she does. But eventually, another question becomes necessary. Why does emotional distance feel so compelling in the first place? Why does uncertainty create attraction? Why does being chosen by someone unavailable feel so meaningful? Why does consistency perhaps feel less exciting? Those questions are uncomfortable because they move attention away from the external person and toward the internal pattern. Maybe somewhere in her early life, love became associated with earning attention. Maybe affection was unpredictable. Maybe being noticed required exceptional behavior. Maybe closeness was something she had to work for. And so, years later, her conscious mind wants love, while another part of her recognizes struggle as love. Now imagine that she begins seeing this. Not intellectually, deeply. She notices the anxiety before acting on it. She notices the urge to chase. She notices the fantasy that if she can finally make this unavailable person choose her, some ancient feeling of inadequacy will disappear. And for the first time, she does something different. She stops chasing. What happens next may feel terrible. The relationship may end. The person may disappear. The fantasy may collapse. She may spend weeks believing she ruined everything. But did she? Or did a pattern lose access to the behavior it needed in order to continue? From the perspective of the old identity, everything went wrong. From the perspective of psychological growth, something finally went right. This is the paradox. Sometimes what is working in your favor does not feel favorable to the person you have been, because the person you have been may depend upon the very pattern you are outgrowing. And this is why Jung's idea of the shadow matters so much. When we confront the shadow, we do not merely discover things we dislike about ourselves. We recover parts of our psychological life that were excluded because they threatened the identity we learned to maintain. A person who was rewarded for being obedient may have placed rebellion in the shadow. A person praised for being endlessly generous may have placed self-interest in the shadow. Someone taught that anger was unacceptable may have buried assertiveness alongside anger. Someone who survived by remaining invisible may have buried the desire to be seen, and someone who learned that safety depended upon controlling everything may have buried the ability to trust uncertainty. Then, when those rejected qualities begin returning, the person can feel as though they are becoming someone else. But often they are not becoming someone else. They are becoming less divided. This is a central insight in the material we are drawing from. The shadow may contain not only painful or rejected traits, but valuable capacities that were pushed away during adaptation qualities, such as imagination, curiosity, leadership, creativity, and the willingness to stand out. This is sometimes called the golden shadow. The parts of yourself you did not reject because they were bad, but because at some point they were unsafe. Perhaps you were naturally expressive, but people laughed. So, you became quiet. Perhaps you were ambitious, but your ambition made others uncomfortable. So you learned to minimize your desires. Perhaps you were creative, but someone repeatedly told you that creativity was impractical. So you became reasonable. Perhaps you had strong intuition about people, but you were repeatedly told that you were imagining things. So you stopped trusting yourself. Years later, you may believe those qualities disappeared, but they may still exist beneath the identity that replaced them. And when they begin returning, life becomes complicated. Because every recovered part of you creates new possibilities. And new possibilities threaten old arrangements. The moment you recover your voice, relationships built around your silence must adjust. The moment you recover ambition, a life built around playing small becomes uncomfortable. But there is still one deeper layer, because eventually, if you continue this process long enough, you encounter something the ego finds extremely difficult to accept. You begin realizing that the life you once wanted may not actually be the life you want anymore, and that realization can feel like losing your future. You spent years imagining it. You worked toward it. You told people about it. Perhaps you even built your identity around it. And suddenly, you do not know whether that future still belongs to you. This is one of the quiet deaths that can accompany individuation. Not the death of the body. The death of a psychological future, the imagined person you thought you had to become. And when that future begins disappearing, there can be grief, real grief. Because we do not only mourn people, we mourn identities. We mourn possibilities. We mourn versions of ourselves. We mourn lives that will never happen exactly as we imagined. And sometimes the reason everything appears to be going wrong is that you are still measuring your present life against a future your psyche has already begun abandoning. You are calling yourself lost because you are no longer walking toward a destination that no longer belongs to you. What if that is not failure? What if that is honesty? And what if the question is no longer, how do I get my old plan back? But, who am I without the future I thought I needed? That question is frightening. But it is also where something new can begin. Because once you stop using an old future to measure your life, you can finally notice what is trying to emerge now. And very often, it begins quietly. A curiosity, a forgotten ability, an unexpected desire, a subject you cannot stop thinking about, a kind of work that makes time disappear, a conversation that awakens something, a part of yourself that seemed to have vanished years ago. These things rarely arrive announcing, I am your new life. They arrive as fragments, and whether you notice them depends on whether you are still desperately staring at the door that closed behind you. Perhaps the next chapter does not begin when another door opens. Perhaps it begins when you finally stop trying to reopen the one that is already closed. This is where trust becomes psychologically important. Not blind trust, not the belief that nothing bad can happen, not the fantasy that if you think positively enough, reality will obey you. A deeper kind of trust. The trust that says, even if I cannot control what happens, I can remain conscious inside what happens. That is very different from believing that life will always give you what you want. Sometimes, life working in your favor may involve not getting what you want at all, because what you consciously want is often shaped by the identity you currently have. And that identity cannot always imagine what lies beyond itself. Think about how many desires or attempts to complete an old psychological story. You want success because somewhere inside, you still want to prove that the people who underestimated you were wrong. You want a particular person because being chosen by them would finally make you feel worthy. You want recognition because invisibility once hurt you. You want control because unpredictability once frightened you. None of these desires make you weak. They make you human. But if you never examine them, you may spend years pursuing goals that are secretly organized around wounds. And even if you achieve them, the wound remains. This is why detachment is often misunderstood. Detachment does not mean not caring. It means caring without making your entire identity dependent upon the result. You can love deeply without trying to possess. You can pursue success without making success your proof of worth. You can have plans without turning those plans into prisons. You can desire an outcome while remaining capable of meeting reality if reality says no. And strangely, this often makes action more effective. Fear narrows perception. Desperation narrows perception. Obsession narrows perception. When only one outcome is psychologically acceptable, you become blind to everything else. But when your identity is no longer trapped inside the result, your field of perception expands. You see alternatives. You improvise. You listen. You adjust. You notice information you previously ignored. You become capable of changing direction without interpreting the change as humiliation. This is where the phrase, "everything is working in my favor," becomes useful if we understand it correctly. It is not a prediction. It is a posture toward uncertainty. It means, I will not assume that the meaning of this moment is already known. Something happens, and within seconds we usually decide what it means. They did not reply. They do not care. The project failed. I am incapable. Someone criticized you. They are against me. You feel confused. I am going backward. A relationship changes. I have lost something that can never be replaced. But you do not know that yet. You know what happened. You do not necessarily know what it means. Meaning often requires time. This is why mature people can sometimes appear calmer during uncertainty. It is not because they do not feel fear. It is because they have lived long enough to know that first interpretations are often incomplete. They have seen rejection become redirection. They have seen success become a trap. They have seen endings create beginnings they could never have planned. They have seen periods they considered wasted later become essential preparation. Life taught them humility before interpretation. So now, when something unexpected happens, they do not immediately say, "This is wonderful," nor do they immediately say, "This is terrible." Sometimes, they simply say, "Let us see. Let us see what this reveals. Let us see what remains after the emotion settles. Let us see whether this door truly needs to reopen. Let us see what becomes possible because the plan changed. Let us see what part of me is reacting." This does not remove pain, but it creates psychological space around pain. And inside that space, new meaning can emerge. There is something within the psyche, seeking greater integration, greater wholeness. Jung used the concept of the self to describe the larger organizing totality of the psyche, something broader than the conscious ego. The ego says, "This is who I am." The self contains far more. The person you know, the person you reject, the potential you have not lived, the contradictions you have not integrated, the qualities still buried in shadow, the future possibilities your present identity cannot yet imagine. This is why individuation can feel like being guided towards something you did not consciously choose. Psychologically, it can mean that unconscious material begins demanding recognition. A dissatisfaction refuses to disappear. An old passion returns. A relationship exposes the same wound again. A situation becomes intolerable. You begin noticing that your external success and internal life no longer match. Something inside you says, "This cannot continue." And sometimes, that voice becomes louder, precisely when everything outside appears stable. You think, "I should be grateful. I have what I wanted. Why am I unhappy?" But perhaps you successfully built a life for an earlier version of yourself. And now, that version is changing. This is why you should be careful about judging a transition too early. You may be standing inside the middle of a process and calling it the end. Imagine renovating an old house. At the beginning, everything looks worse. Furniture is removed. Walls are opened. Dust appears everywhere. The familiar structure disappears before the new structure exists. If you walked into the house during this stage without knowing renovation was happening, you might conclude, "This house is being destroyed." And technically, part of it is. But destruction is not the entire story. Something is being removed because something else is being rebuilt. Psychological transformation often feels exactly like this. The first evidence of change may not be addition, it may be removal. Less tolerance for false relationships, less interest in meaningless competition, less willingness to betray yourself, less need to impress, less attachment to identities that once defined you. And because we tend to measure progress through accumulation, we often misread subtraction as failure. More money, more status, more achievement, more certainty. But individuation may initially give you less noise, less performance, less approval, less belonging to places where you were never truly known, less desire to become what everyone expected. This can look like decline from the outside, but internally, space is being created, and space can be frightening when you are accustomed to filling every part of yourself with activity. Yet, if you remain there long enough, something you have been avoiding may begin speaking. What do you actually want? Not what would impress people, not what would prove something, not what your family expected, not what your old identity planned. What do you actually want? Who are you when nobody is evaluating you? What do you enjoy when it produces no status? What kind of life would feel meaningful even if nobody envied it? These questions can expose how much of your life has been built around an audience. Sometimes an actual audience, sometimes an imaginary one. Parents, friends, former partners, people who doubted you, people you want to impress, people you fear disappointing. We can spend decades performing for internalized spectators, then call the performance ambition. But perhaps your life is not failing. Perhaps it is failing according to a standard that no longer represents you. Maybe fewer people approve of you, but you finally approve of your own choices. Maybe your social circle became smaller because you stopped maintaining connections built entirely around convenience. Maybe your path looks slower because you stopped running toward things you never truly wanted. Maybe you feel less certain because you finally started asking real questions. And maybe what looks like disorder now contains more truth than the order you had before. If this part resonates with you, leave one word in the comments: trust. Not because you know exactly what will happen, but because you are learning that uncertainty does not automatically mean you are lost. There comes a point when you stop asking life for constant signs that you are on the right path. At first, you want confirmation everywhere. The perfect coincidence, the perfect opportunity, the perfect feeling. Someone to tell you, yes, keep going, this is correct. But genuine individuation gradually removes this dependency. Because if you require external confirmation before every meaningful decision, you are still allowing the external world to determine your inner direction. A mature relationship with synchronicity is not obsessive. You do not hunt for signs. You do not interpret every random event as a command. You do not surrender responsibility to coincidence. Instead, you become attentive. There is a major difference between attention and superstition. Superstition says, "This happened, therefore I must do this." Attention says, "This affected me. Why?" That question returns responsibility to consciousness. Why did that sentence stay with me? Why did that conversation disturb me? Why does this opportunity frighten and excite me at the same time? Why does this person's criticism hurt so much? The event becomes a mirror, not an instruction, and mirrors are useful because they reveal what is already there. This is where synchronicity becomes psychologically powerful, not because the world is necessarily sending secret commands, but because meaningful events can reveal the state of your inner world. Something outside touches something inside, and for one brief moment, you see yourself more clearly. This is why simple categories become less useful as you mature. Success, failure, winning, losing. Sometimes life refuses to fit those categories. Something that looks like success can slowly destroy you. Something that looks like failure can save you. And often, you cannot know which is which while you are inside it. So, perhaps the wisest psychological position is neither optimism nor pessimism. It is openness. The willingness to say, "I will meet this completely," before deciding what it means. Someone leaves, you grieve. But you do not immediately decide that you were abandoned because you were unworthy. A plan collapses. You respond. But you do not immediately decide your future has been destroyed. Someone rejects you. You feel it. But you do not build an identity around the rejection. Something succeeds. You enjoy it. But you do not make success proof that you are superior. Something fails. You learn. But you do not make failure proof that you are inferior. You remain in relationship with reality without turning every event into a verdict about who you are. That is psychological freedom, and once you begin living from that place, something unexpected happens. You become harder to manipulate, because manipulation often depends upon your fear of losing something: approval, belonging, status, love, security. If someone knows you cannot tolerate losing their approval, they can control you with disapproval. If you cannot tolerate being alone, someone can control you with withdrawal. If you cannot tolerate uncertainty, Anyone offering certainty can become powerful over you. But the moment you become capable of losing without losing yourself, the structure changes. You can still care, you can still hurt, but fear no longer automatically makes the decision. You stop making choices primarily to avoid loss. You begin making choices according to alignment. That changes relationships. That changes work. That changes what opportunities you notice. That changes what you refuse. That changes what you are willing to risk. That changes everything. Not overnight, not magically. Quietly, one decision at a time. And then, months or years later, you look backward and realize something astonishing. The event you once believed destroyed your path was the event after which your path finally began changing. The person you thought you needed was the person whose absence forced you to meet yourself. The failure you were ashamed of was the failure that ended a life you were secretly exhausted from maintaining. The period when nothing seemed to happen was the period when your inner structure was changing most deeply. And the strange part is that, while it was happening, you could not see any of it. You could only see what was disappearing. This is why sometimes the greatest act of courage is not knowing that everything will work out. It is continuing to live consciously when you have absolutely no proof that it will. Because perhaps trust is not believing that life will follow your plan. Perhaps trust is knowing that even when it does not, you do not have to abandon yourself. So, if something in your life is falling apart right now, do not force yourself to call it beautiful. Do not pretend you are not afraid. Do not use psychology to escape grief. Feel what is real. Respond to what needs to be handled. Take responsibility where responsibility belongs. Ask for help when you need it. But after you have done that, leave one small space open. A space in which you admit, I may not understand this yet. Protect that space, because that is where a different future can enter. Perhaps the relationship really is over. Perhaps the plan really did fail. Perhaps the old identity really is disappearing. But perhaps your mistake is assuming that because you cannot see what replaces it, nothing is coming. There is a moment in every transformation when the old structure has already begun dissolving, and the new structure is still invisible. That moment feels like emptiness, like failure, like being left behind. But psychologically, it can be one of the most important thresholds of your life, because now you have a choice. You can rebuild the old structure simply because you recognize it, or you can remain in the uncertainty long enough to discover what no longer requires you to betray yourself. Eventually, you may look back at this period and notice that the most important thing was not what you received. It was what you stopped chasing. Not who arrived, but who you stopped pretending to be. Not which door opened, but which closed door you finally stopped standing in front of. Not the certainty you found, but the uncertainty you learned to survive. So, the next time something goes differently than expected, remember this. Before you say, everything is going wrong, wait. Before you decide, I ruined everything, wait. Before you run back toward what you already know has ended, wait. Ask yourself, what if I am seeing only the disruption and not yet the reorganization? What if something in me has changed, and my life is beginning to reflect that change? What if this moment is not asking me to restore who I was? What if it is asking me to discover who I am without the things I thought I needed? Do not act as if nothing can go wrong. Act as if going wrong does not always mean what you think it means. Act as if uncertainty can contain possibility. Act as if an ending can remain an ending without becoming the end of you. Act as if you do not need to know the entire path before taking the next honest step. And above all, act as if the person you are becoming may understand this chapter far better than the person experiencing it today. Because perhaps the deepest transformation begins when you stop asking life to return you to who you were. And finally, allow the unknown to introduce you to who you are becoming. If this journey helped you recognize something happening beneath the surface of your own life, subscribe to the Kingdom Within. And remember, sometimes the moment you think everything is falling apart is simply the moment you can no longer return to a life you have already outgrown.